Okay, thank you for coming in. Columbian's editorial board is pleased to welcome Congresswoman Marie Gluesenkamp Perez. Unfortunately, Joe Kent, your challenger in this race, did not respond to our invitation to join us, so we are happy to have you. I'm Greg Jane, the editorial page editor, but before we go any further, I should mention we are recording this. We will post it unedited on our website and our YouTube channel. And beyond that, then we'll get the editorial board members.
Ben Campbell, I'm publisher and co-owner of the Columbian and member of the editorial board.
I'm Colleen Keller. I'm the assistant news editor of the Columbian and a member of the editorial board.
And I'm Craig Brown, the editor of the Columbian and Columbian.com, and a member of the editorial board.
Right, so thanks again for joining us. Just very briefly, Marie, introduce yourself, and then we'll move on to some specific questions.
Great. Well, my name is Marie Gluesenkamp Perez. Before being elected to represent Southwest Washington in Congress, I ran an auto repair and machine shop with my husband. When I decided to run, I had an 8-month-old. My son's now 3 and leaves a incredible dirt ring around the tub every time. I'm really proud of, our community and our values in Southwest Washington. My family's lived in Washington State for 6 generations. I was just visiting my great-great-grandfather's grave in Tenino, here in the district. And, I ran for Congress because I wanted to represent our values in Washington, D.C. Like a lot of my neighbors, I'm really sick of seeing D.C. culture and politics inflict itself on us. We want our priorities reflected in DC, not the other way around. And that's why I'm proud of my record doing exactly that. Representing our values there. I'm in the top 3% of most bipartisan members of the U.S. House of Representatives. I'm the most bipartisan member of our state delegation. And that's the work I'm going to continue to do, representing our values in DC if I'm able to be reelected.
Great, thank you, and thanks again for joining us. Now, hopefully, we'll try and focus, because I know you're answering a lot of questions from a lot of media outlets during this time. We'll try and focus on some local issues here, but one that is of national interest that also touches us is you emphasize securing the border. What does that mean? What is the path to doing that?
Yeah, people in my community have seen fentanyl hollow out our families. We've seen horrific accidents. We've seen, people losing their loved ones, losing their own lives, losing their businesses. And that needs to be taken seriously. So I've been taking on the Biden administration to ensure that we secure the southern border. That is our obligation, to secure our southern and all of our borders. And so ensuring that our law enforcement have the resources to do that work, ensuring that the administration knows what we want here in Southwest Washington. That's a big priority of mine and one of the things that I've been fighting for.
Specifically, what kind of legislation would best address that?
Yeah, well, I focused in my letters to the administration on Title 42, exercising his authority under Title 42, also the Remain in Mexico policy. I voted for the largest border workforce we've seen in our country's history because we've seen we had seen a real spike in border crossings. We should know who is coming in and out of our borders. That's not a crazy thing to say. And so ensuring they have the resources to do that, ensuring that our ports have the technology to see what's coming through our legal ports of entry, ensuring that our asylum system isn't being abused. That's the kind of tangible, pragmatic work of building a bipartisan coalition. I was one of the leaders of the Defending Borders, Defending Democracy discharge petition, which was eventually what became, they broke it up into 5 votes and brought it to the floor. But that was funding for infrastructure at the southern border, workforce, and also military aid to countries who are fighting terrorism and the anti-democratic neighbors who invaded them.
Now, you've received some criticism for not supporting a House bill related to border security. Why did you vote against that? And I
Well-
believe that was HR too.
Oh, yeah, so there was a discharge petition also, so people talk about different things. One of
Right.
the things was, there was bipartisan, a Senate bill that the House wouldn't bring to the floor. It never had bipartisan support in the floor, and we knew that to pass legislation, you need a bipartisan majority, and so that's why I brought forward a bipartisan solution to that and the Defending Borders, Defending Democracy's discharge petition to get that support that we need, that our allies need. The first one, HR 2, when I talked to agricultural producers, it really put us at a disadvantage as compared to like the banking industry or any other industry. E-Verify was something that was not going to work for our farming communities. And so I waited to get a better deal that would have a level playing field in different industries.
Correct.
This is a rematch, obviously. So what's different this campaign season?
Yeah, this is some ways feels like the sequel. The sequel's always worse. My opponent changed the color of his yard signs, but that's it. This is the same extremist that we rejected 2 years ago. And, this guy has been the most extreme divisive candidate we've seen in our state's history. He continues on that path. He is here to fight a culture war and fight for political ideology. I'm here to fight for our community's values, the priorities of our towns and cities. That's what matters to me. That's why I'm proud of my bipartisan record. And that's one key difference between 2 years ago and this year. Like, I now have a record to point to say I wasn't kidding. I wasn't here to play games. I was here to pursue the interests of our communities and ensure those are represented in the ways that we're spending dollars, the legislation that we're prioritizing. And I have demonstrated like the work ethic of a small business owner. I think I'd answered like 40,000 letters when a colleague told me, they asked me how we got our phone line set up. I was like, dude, get to work. I'm really proud of having one of the fastest turnaround times to get a letter back to a constituent when they write me. The average on the Hill is 45 days. My office is, I think, at 14 days right now. We take it very seriously. Our casework is very important to me. We've returned over $2 million from federal agencies that owed my constituents money, whether it's the VA or the IRS, getting people their military records back, helping people with passports. Casework is really important to me. And I've also manifested my commitment to being available and present and accountable, holding in-person roundtables and town halls in every county, opening up a second office to ensure that we haven't had that outside of Vancouver. And, Vancouver's great, but it's also important that we're available and accessible in more rural communities as well. So I'm really proud of being consistent in my positions. I'm proud of the record I've built doing that work. I'm proud of bringing back over $2 billion for the I-5 bridge. And, I have a very unusual profile for somebody to be in the Congress. I remember, so when you get elected, they give you this book of all of your classmates, the people who were elected at the same time as you. And I was like looking through it to try to figure out who I had something in common with. I found this guy, his profile said that they had a family business. I was like, oh, what's your family business? And he was like, we have an equity investment firm. And that's great. But like to have somebody who's actually had a small business, an independent business, family business in the trades, who's had OSHA show up at their shop, who's fighting for a spot in daycare, who built their own home in a rural community, that is very, very unusual. And if we want to see better legislation, if we want to see a shift in national priorities, we have to start electing more normal people to Congress who have the same experiences as our community. So I'm proud of my record. Joe continues to be really extreme and out of step with our community's values. he is on tape before and after the overturn of Roe, calling for a national ban on abortion. He's the same guy that called for a complete ban on all immigration for 20 years to reestablish a white majority. Last time we knew that he put a Proud Boy on his paid campaign staff. This time he set up a shell corporation to funnel all of his campaign expenditures through. So he's not accountable to his community for how he's spending campaign money and who he's putting on staff. That's just sleazy to me.
Frank, anything else?
No, that's,
Yeah, I just wanted to ask you about, getting back just to your voting record. Some people feel that you have gone too far to the right sometimes for a Democrat, that you are bending over backwards to try to show people that, to disavow Joe Kent's claims about you being so liberal, very extremist and all of that. Talk about that a little bit. About your voting record, are you always feel it's 100% sincere with your vote, or are you being extra mindful of how it's going to play at home?
Yeah, my colleagues are always like shocked to hear how many independent newspapers we still have. We are really an outlier, but part of that means that people's perception of the world more and more in this country is shaped by national narratives. And I really bring a focus on our issues at home. I took a ton of heat for being one of two Democrats to oppose Biden's student debt forgiveness plan. But when I looked at the data, what I saw was that of the states that got the most benefit from that, the way it was written, Washington State was 48 at the bottom of the list. And this community, Southwest Washington, only holds 3% of the federally issued debt in the state. This was not a bill that was written in mind, or a policy that was written in mind with us in mind, with people in the trades in mind. And so, I had people with PhDs organizing protests at my auto shop. I'm not going to back down from representing a very different set of experiences and priorities and reflecting my community's values in DC. I think that people get the idea that like it's really important to all young people or all Democrats, but to me, it's like we can't have a worldview that is shaped primarily by politics. It's got to be informed by where we're from, where we live, our communities, our neighbors, by people who are working in the trades, who are, calling in favors for neighbors for babysitting. And I think one of the unfortunate things that happened is that like people's policies have been identified by like their party's politics. Like I go to DC and it feels like you're supposed to have the same 10 priorities if you're a Democrat and the same 10 priorities if you're a Republican, but nobody in DC gives a hoot about flooding the Chehalis River Valley. They don't give a hoot about the South Bend boat shop. They don't give a hoot about rural water systems. I do. That's my community. That's how I think about my votes, where I should be spending my time and my legislative, muscle to build out the middle, to build out the room with people who feel like they haven't been heard before, and shaping politics and redefining what those are. Because if you just adopt their priorities, you will never get good legislation. You do not get good legislation without having people who are turning wrenches, driving trucks, and changing diapers at the table. And I'm not here for that. I don't think people in my community sent me to DC to fight for statehood for DC. Like, that wasn't one of the things that I hear at the town halls I'm at. And so, my policies, I think, they're heterodox, just like my communities. Like, we are a very independent community. And the more we silo into political teams and not community groups, like the more difficult it's going to be. We have got to fight to preserve our independent culture in Southwest Washington. And And that's what I'm doing, because that's how we fix the national policy. So, I'm not here to play partisan football. I'm not here to accrue power for one political team. What I'm interested in is like finding the idea that like, there's effectively single party control of rural America right now. And when they know they've got you no matter what, when you've got a lifetime tenure on a seat for your member of Congress, like they don't work for you, like they've got it, it's over. And then we don't get the policies that fix our country more broadly, so that's where my loyalty is. And that's why, I put my life in a blender to do this, because it matters to have that kind of representation.
Okay, and you feel it is not hurting your ability to get most legislation passed, you have to have a coalition there in the House
That's right.
to work with. Is that?
That's right. I've introduced 49 bipartisan bills. I have passed the second highest number of amendments of any freshman in my party, because I have a different set of priorities. I'm not trying to take marching orders from somewhere else. So my unique background is somebody who's made my living in the trades, lives in a rural community. Like that is an asset in finding different avenues to chase down the priorities and the values that my party supports. I want home ownership. I don't think we're going to get there through Joe Biden's $55 rent cap. That's his words, not mine. I think we're going to get there through home ownership and having shop class in high school again, and having a navigable system of permitting and engineering so that families can build their own homes again. Those are the levers and the vehicles that I've found and that have been proven to be actually effective in changing the legislative path.
You follow up on that. You mentioned that one party kind of has a stranglehold on rural America. Why is that? Why? And how do Democrats fight that?
Well, I don't think that we do it from a partisan perspective is the first thing. Like, we do it by listening to our communities and figuring out what we agree on. I think it almost feels like a conspiracy theory to divide us so that we can't unify behind things. Like, there was a period when I was getting a lot of letters about Hunter Biden's laptop. And, I think sitting down and thinking about that, lifting up the hood on that, what those people are actually saying is that they feel like there's a justice system for people with money and power, and then there's a justice system for everybody else. That's something we all agree on. So I don't need to denigrate them or make them small. There's actually a coalition to build there, and so you kind of, in some senses, you got to like delete the proper nouns, delete the celebrity focus, and figure out what are the underlying values that we actually agree on, where are we getting off the train. And then in other instances, we need to bring in more nuance, bring more nouns into the dialogue. Like, there was a OMB review recently that found that, the tax credits used for electric vehicles were mostly used by much wealthier Americans. I've got legislation coming forward that instead we put more of a focus on putting a skirt on a mobile home. That's basically a metal sheet that goes around the bottom of a mobile home and connects the front, saves a hell of a lot of energy. There are ways to achieve what we all believe in that build out the middle class. But a lot of my colleagues have not lived, in an RV. They haven't experienced it. They don't know all of the avenues we could pursue to build more consensus. And so.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. Ben?
If you could change one thing about Washington's legislative process in order to better serve your constituents.
Just one. Well, this is what comes to mind most immediately. I sit on small business and ag committees, and it has become increasingly clear to me that people on the East Coast have an advantage in representation. The amount of time I spend on a plane compared to other members. And also when I look for witness testimony to come and sit in small business committee, like how many business owners do you know could drop everything, buy, a $900 plane ticket, find childcare and just show up? And that's why when I go to these committee hearings, all these dudes have bow ties. And sometimes I'm like, you guys are talking about energy efficiency standards for machines, like none of you have actually turned a wrench and considered the failure points on these and like how that's impacting our landfills, our emissions, the bottom line for families who are now replacing these things every 3 years, right? Like we need a broader set of constituencies at the table in those meetings. And so I've got a bill that would allow for remote testimony. So we can have a fuller spectrum of Americans at that table and involved. So that's one of the steps that I've taken that, I think is more achievable in the immediate term.
And just real quick, have you found much support for that legislation?
Yeah, particularly for members that are more rural,
Sure.
Or less wealthy districts.
Okay.
Other members who have, who the system works for currently, like, they say that it's lazy. I don't think it's lazy to work for a living and not be able to afford a plane ticket at the drop of a hat.
So you're advocating for moving the capital to Omaha?
No, I want remote testimony
No.
in committees. That's one maybe smaller piece, but it's still an important piece. But it's similar. Like I went to a dinner Lena Khan was speaking at and had the chance to ask her a question. I was like, how many of your employees don't have a PhD? Because I don't need a government study to tell me, like every mechanic I know can look at a headlight assembly and tell you where we used to replace a light bulb for $3, you now have to do the whole headlight assembly for $700. A profound impact on family budgets. Like I didn't need a study to do that. And I didn't need a PhD to do that. So how are we going to get a fuller spectrum of intelligence at the table and overcome the hurdle of credentialing that is just not based in, like, we need a broader definition of credentialing. And then I also introduced a bill with a Republican colleague that would basically any federally funded election, you could no longer restrict primary voting based on party. To say like, you can't just check a R versus D over, in the corner. You actually have to represent the ideas and values you're fighting for and have more people involved in the primary process. It's a fundamentally more democratic system.
So by that, you mean the way Washington does it?
It'd be more similar to us, yeah.
Okay. Both presidential candidates have thrown out a lot of economic proposals. What do you see? How would those affect Southwest Washington?
Well, I guess I wish you say they've thrown out a lot of economic policies, but I'm not really satisfied that they have. Like, I would like to see more concrete terms and more policy discussion and less vibes, I think it's really important that government understand you can't push with a rope. you're not gonna create more housing by putting a $55 rent cap on something. You know, you're not gonna support our farmers with some of these tariff policies. You know, I want a level playing field for our small businesses. I think a lot of tax policy gets weaponized. It can be a moat protecting really big guys from family businesses. We want clarity, you know, we want a simplified plan. When I visited a mill worker or a mill owner, I was like talking about how I could be helpful. He was like, please just stop changing the rules. Give me 4 years without changing the rules. If you don't have an HR department or a legal department, it is much more difficult to stay abreast. And so I think clarity, simplicity. You know, one thing I learned, like, if you use the earned income tax credit, you're more likely to be audited than somebody who makes 20 times more than you. They go after low hanging fruit. If you've got a very complex return and a team of lawyers behind you, you're not being audited, and then we get stuck putting the bill for that. I don't think that's right.
So do you support increased funding for the IRS that would?
Well, I have voted to ensure they have the staff they need to go after the most complex returns and not just the low hanging fruit. That is my community. You know, we want a level playing field. I also really like it when a human answers the phone when I call the IRS. I think most of my constituents do too. And it's also true that a lot of the people that work in the IRS are nearing retirement age. And so just to maintain employment levels, like, there needs to be proactive consideration. There needs to be, we need to be looking down the road on that. It's not about like going after more people. It's about ensuring that there's a level playing field in who is held accountable for following the law as it currently exists.
You've been a big champion of the Interstate Bridge Replacement Project and secured a lot of federal money for it. So can you talk a little bit about where we stand with that, and maybe also touch on why the federal government isn't going to pay 100% of the cost?
Yeah, I'm really proud to have had the success of bringing home our federal tax dollars. Like, that is the job of a federal representative, to get our tax dollars back home. That money, it was knives out to get that money. I really needed to build an understanding. I think some of my colleagues are used to being able to just send an email and get money. Like, that's not how it works. That's not effective advocacy. I got people from the administration. I got Secretary of Transportation out to stand on the bridge in the rain and feel it shake when the trucks go past and tell them it's 107 years old. It's rated functionally obsolete. Would you bring your 3-year-olds on this bridge? I don't like to. $132 million of freight crosses that bridge every day. Our community, our small businesses rely on that bridge being safe. And, you know, my family has a proud history of working on infrastructure projects in Washington State. And when I visit things like the Bonneville dams, like, you look at the visitor logs there, people are still visiting and saying, like, my grandfather built this. Like, people are still proud of being part of something that makes things that last and that are an asset for their children, not a liability. So when I think about, like, my shop, I'm like, I'm not going to wait for the roof to collapse before I start putting money in just fixing it, right? So my role is to bring the dollars home. I think it's important that federal elections don't see themselves as you know, a monarch, like you don't go in and dictate the color and shape of the bridge. I do view my role as advocating for my constituents to be heard in the design selection, that local and state electeds are hearing our people when they say what they want, and what they don't want. But it shouldn't be my choice. It needs to be the priorities of my community. So, you know, a couple weeks ago, I sent a letter to the IBR team, raising concerns I have, and I hear from people all across my community about how this proposed bridge designs would impact traffic congestion. So that's the real felt impact for so many of us, is like sitting in traffic is not something God made us to do and take lightly. Like we want to be home coaching Little League, especially in communities like mine, like in Skamania County, it's something like 80% of employed people are employed outside of the county. A lot of my neighbors are on that bridge sitting in traffic and not coaching Little League, and that's a real loss to our communities. And so ensuring that those voices and perspectives are heard is really important to me. And today when I saw tolling proposals, you know, immediately got to work putting a statement out. So it's like our community has not been fighting for bells and whistles. We've been fighting to make sure that our pride in being tradespeople is reflected in that bridge, that we are making something that lasts, that we are building it with labor from Southwest Washington, that we are building it with American-made steel, like those questions. And, you know, I mean, I think that is part of my experience as a business owner. Like, there would be these like business roundtables and things like that, and they would always be on the other side of the river at like 9 a.m. on a Friday when you have to be checking cars in, you know. And so it's really hard it is hard to build a representative advocacy group. And so making sure that a representative section of our community is heard in that process is really important to me.
Tony?
Yes, I'm sorry. So I know you go around the district a lot, and I'm sure you have seen for yourself the homelessness and the impact. What role, if any, can Congress play in helping communities address it?
Well, one thing is fighting for funding for our SHOP programs in higher public schools. So I learned that in Washington State, the average federally involved affordable housing unit costs like $500,000. My husband and I built our house ourselves for about $120K in material for a nice 1,800 square foot house. Now, so this might sound crazy to some people, but I really believe in advancing owner builder policies, ensuring that Americans have the skills and the opportunities to build their own homes themselves. We need to build more housing. We need to build more starter homes. A contractor building, you know, a 6,000 square foot house faces mostly the same permitting and usage fees as somebody trying to build, you know, 1,000 foot square starter home. And that means that we have not built enough starter homes in this country. I think it's important that the feds don't have the idea they can push with a rope on this one. You can't like mandate market conditions, but we can consider, one of the things that one of the bills I'm on is that's the YIMBY bill, the Yes in My Backyard, that prioritizes federal dollars to communities that streamline their permitting process, and their site review and things like that. I also think that in a lot of communities, manufactured and mobile homes are probably the most achievable form of housing abundance. So I'm on some legislation looking at how do we reduce, for instance, like mobile homes have to be built on a chassis that adds significant cost. Is that really necessary? I'm gonna go get like what are the things, and that does fall under HUD. So I've been thinking about this quite a bit. The reason that the dollar is the prime reserve currency of the world is because of the quality of housing stock that we have in this country. And, ensuring that we are building homes and have policies that prioritize using lumber that's from our woods, that has density, that has, that's sequestering carbon, and not taking the bait on some of these things that just don't feel like a good deal. Like you can have triple glazed argon filled windows all you want. You can put, you can mandate heat pumps, but if the house doesn't have adequate eaves, or if it's built with a glue that's going to dissolve in northwest rain, like we're not going to advance moving wealth through generations. We're not going to advance homeownership. And a lot of policies you hear talked about in DC, they get so myopic. If you are only focused on bringing down the cost of daycare, your tools are really limited. But if instead you are thinking about the household budget as a normal mom, you're like, well, my money, it's not like I can use the same dollars for groceries as daycare. So what do we do to address the cost of, like being able to afford, how do I put this clearly? Like, we can also, we don't just need to create subsidies for childcare. We need to think about how we can lower people's cost of housing by increasing homeownership rates. We have quite a few more tools at our disposal than we realize. And a lot of them are innate to us as a culture of people who grow it and make and do things. My husband's of German extraction. Like in other parts of the world, they don't just do their own plumbing and paint their own houses. They don't, they hire, there's specializations for everything. We really do believe in DIY as a part of our core identity. And so that's an asset I don't think has been leveraged in the way it needs to.
Thank you. Maria, I know you're on a tight schedule, so excuse me. Give us your final pitch for why voters should support you.
Joe Kent is the same extreme divisive candidate he was 2 years ago. He's on tape, pre and post Dobbs, saying he believes in a national ban on abortion. He says he's changed, but I think he's lying. Like this guy knows what he wants to do. And, maybe his political consultants are telling him to massage it a certain way, but I think he's lying. I think we know who he is. I think we know what he wants to do. And it has nothing to do with who we are. He moved to a town whose name he can't even pronounce, by the way, watch his ads, to purge the Republican Party of people like my parents. He is not here for us. He is here to accrue power for a political ideology that he has imported from Oregon. I'm really proud to have done exactly what I said I would do. Just fight for our values, the values of a woman who can choose for healthcare, a level playing field for small businesses, the perpetuation of family-owned farms, local agriculture, infrastructure that is built to last and is responsive to our values and our needs here locally. I'm proud of my record. And it's been an incredible honor. I would love to keep that fight up in Washington, D.C. I don't see that many other people who are doing that. And I'm incredibly honored to had the chance to fight for the values that I was raised with, that my family has been a part of in our state for 6 generations.
Great, thank you. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.